Welcome back to D&D Beyond. And you know her, you love her from Daredevil, from True Blood, and now Truest Blood, from the great
Yay.
Relics and Rarities, and most recently a competitor on Champions of the Realm. Please welcome Deborah Ann Woll to the stream. How you doing today?
Hi, I'm really good. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
You are one of my very favorite people to talk about Dungeons and Dragons with, and you
Thank you.
also run an incredible game of Dungeons and Dragons. So that is what we are going to talk about today. We are going to get some tips on DMing. We're going to talk
Ooh.
puzzles and props, and a little bit about why maybe everybody should try it. So please, if you have some questions on these subjects for Deborah, please put them in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into it. How long now? Because we've had you on the
Okay.
channel before I got here a
Yes.
couple of times before.
Yes. A couple of times.
And I think at that time you had already been DMing for several years, and it's now been what, like a decade?
I think I started when I was 25. I started playing. Maybe a year or two after that, I started dungeon mastering. So yeah, I just had a birthday, 37. So yeah, about 10 years dungeon mastering, 12 years playing.
Happy recent
How?
birthday! What would you say in the time that you have been playing
Yeah.
has changed for you as a dungeon master?
Ooh. Oh boy. Um, I think just confidence, just straight up p- doing it more and more, becoming more and more confident. Having those, in the beginning, I planned a lot. And I'm still a planner. That's never going to totally go away. But I've had those moments in games since then where the players make a choice and go in a direction that you did not plan for. And I find that they also are just as wonderful, that like the faith in yourself that you can improvise your way through a strong storytelling moment. It really has to be experienced to be believed, especially for me, because I will always underestimate myself. So to have that moment happen and go, oh wow, I actually made up that whole encounter on the spot and it went okay. In fact, it was really fun. You kind of have to be thrown in the deep end and survive it to then trust that you can handle it when it happens. So that's probably the biggest adjustment.
Well, that's wonderful because that was actually gonna be one of my questions as someone so
Yeah.
good and meticulously, like, laying out these wonderful situations. I say
Yeah.
meticulous for the sheer seat of our pants, rules light of the world.
Yes.
It's very impressive. But I um, I was curious what
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna back burner that next one
Okay.
because I'm excited to get into
Okay.
it. But,
Okay.
um, what's the best part of being a dungeon master?
The best part of being a dungeon master. So for me, it's what is that live collaborative storytelling moment bit. I came from live theater. That was the first bit of acting I ever did. It was what made me fall in love with it. It's what I am striving to find my way back towards. And part of the thrill of live theater is that, audience in the palm of your hand, that you can feel their energy and they're with you in this present moment. And that doesn't quite happen on a film set. Film set is sort of satisfying and fulfilling in a very different way. But on stage, that's part of the allure of that. And what's interesting though is that in most stage theater, the audience is still a passive participant. They still sit back in their seats and they might cry or they might laugh. They might, get surprised, but they're not creating with you. And so I they're just sort of they're present, but there's a crackle to D&D when you are telling a story and it directly affects something that your audience is engaged with. And because they are more than an audience, a D&D team is an equal part of that storytelling process. And so there are moments when I often equate it to like it's like sports and storytelling come together because we were waiting on like one role to see if they could like heal this, person that they had rescued. And everyone's like, and all I said was like, her eyes flutter. And everyone was like, yeah. They jumped out of their chairs and they were so excited and they were cheering. And like, the best live performance on stage I've ever given. No one went, yeah. Like that. So there's a permission because you are involved in the storytelling as a player to engage at that level, and that to me is single-handedly the reason I love this game and why I try to get everyone I know to give it a shot.
What is a time in a game that something just didn't work out the way that you planned, and
Mm,
how did you adjust to it?
interesting. So, I try as I'm building games and running things as a dungeon master, I try to allow for solutions to come from anywhere, right? I want you to be able to solve it if your character is a brainy character through the puzzle, if your character's a um strong person by knocking the thing down. Like I want you to be able to attack the problem in any way possible. So I try not to be too precious. Like if people decide not to do my puzzle, I'm like, great, I can use it later, right? Like you didn't solve it, so I just need to redress it, and I have a puzzle for later, and you think I came up with 2 puzzles, but I only
Okay,
came
that's
up with
genius.
right? So it's actually really wonderful when they when they solve the problem without using my puzzle. Um, so I don't know. I don't know that I actually think of it as anything going wrong, you know? It just goes different, and that's okay. And a lot of times, especially as I'm play testing material, I love that because now if I wanna write it down and publish it or I wanna run it again, I can actually weave into the story those options. So, in many ways, when players go off track or, like, find their own way to solve things, that's, like, good for me because I get to steal it and pretend that I was that brilliant in the beginning.
Was there a learning curve for sort of over time, like you alluded earlier to kind of you
Mhm.
have to discover by living through it that actually it turned
Right,
out fine when you improvised.
right.
But was there anything stand out about that?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, especially for other GMs coming into it who might feel like, "Oh, I wouldn't be a good dungeon master because I don't have the confidence, or I don't do voices, or I don't," these kinds of things. I don't do very good voices, but I'm a silly person, so I just lean in to being silly, like, I do silly voices instead of good voices, you know, um, or like I know I'm a crafty person. I love props. I like making things. So again, I can lean into that. I like puzzles. So I lean into that. So, rather than feeling like you have to do it like someone else does it or you have to do it like the books do it, that's even the player's guide and the DMG, they always say, this is a guide. Like this is just the baseline mechanics. Like you dress this up however you want it and you tell the story. And in the end, if you don't like this rule differently, like so that's part of what I think is really special about the literally the D&D publication is that they are so
Mm,
open to just inspiring you to create something of your own.
I do
So
think
yeah,
I
that's a
love that
little
line there.
bit.
The rules
Yeah.
don't run the game, you do. Mhm.
Yeah, you do.
Amazing.
And
Mhm.
there's a number of times where we'll come to a moment where someone wants to do something because I always want players to play from their imaginations, not from their sheet. So I kind of want them to go, "Oh, I want to distract them by like making an illusion." And I'm like, "Oh, do you have any spells for that?" And they go, "Yeah, I've got minor illusion, but it only does this, this, and this." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll offer you this." So like that's one of my favorite things to go is like, I will offer you that in this case, minor illusion can do this, but it's gonna cost you an exhaustion or something like that, or it's gonna
Mhm.
cost you 2 slots, or it's, like, we'll bargain, and I'll say, "I would rather you try to do that cool thing, and it's just gonna cost you a little something more," rather than be like, "Nope, can't do it," you know?
Mhm.
So, that's another thing that I think with time and experience, you begin to go, you begin to feel less, beholden to, like, the literal. And my feeling is as long as the agreement between your players and you is mutual, as long as they agree to those terms, then, hey, run with it.
You're off to the races.
Yeah,
So I think you've covered a lot of this, but what would you recommend for someone who is considering
right.
stepping behind the screen for the first time?
Yeah, well, like I said, play into your own strengths and play into your own interests. That was another thing. I'm not a big fantasy person. Like I don't come from Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or even Dungeons and Dragons very much. I like fairy tales and I like adventure stories. I'm high adventure, like low fantasy. And, in fact, my current obsession is human commoners. I'm really interested in playing D&D with human commoners and again, letting the l I get like, I like players more than I like characters sometimes. So I really want my players to feel like they're shining and the vehicle by which they're shining is their character rather than my character with the amazing big backstory and the fancy spells they can do. It's you, right? You're amazing, and your amazingness is being funneled through this character, and that's the actor in me because that's, for me, what acting is. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's leaning into as a dungeon master, what do you love? Do you love, manga? Do you love, Pokemon? Do you love like what are the things? Do you like haunted houses? Do you like, you know, y- underwater? Like what are the things that make your heart kind of go, whew, I'm so excited to tell this story? Because then you're gonna need less notes. You're gonna be able to improvise that on the spot much more easily because it's yours. And so that's always my recommendation to beginning dungeon masters is think about what you love, think about what you're naturally good at and run that game. And again, you might not be right for every single player, but you will run the best game that you're capable of rather than like a not so good version of someone else's.
I love that. I also to pick up on I love what you said about drawing on it, thinking of it as an actor in terms of wanting the players to
Yeah.
shine. And I do think that like well, I try not to get sidetracked. Like there are things to do with training and technique as actors that are, some people are really going to enjoy leaning into and some aren't in
Mhm.
terms of like, I have studied speech patterns and mannerisms. That's going to
Right,
be for
right,
some
right, right,
people
right.
and some not. But I think there's a basic core that if you've spent a lot of time performing you'll recognize jargon like connecting to a character and things like that. But in practice, what it
Mhm.
sort of means is the way people come alive, the way people
Mhm.
kind of shine from the inside and get excited when they
Yeah.
understand what's happening and why they're doing it, and it just sort of elevates the fun for everyone. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that clearly you are able to draw out of people as a DM.
I hope so. I mean, the and again, I'm coming from theater and film can be different, but there's a reason we do Romeo and Juliet over and over and over again. It's because each new actor who steps into one of those roles f- fills it, floods it with themselves, right? It's not if there was one perfect way to play Juliet, someone would have done it and we would have been done by now. But it's
Check.
because yeah, it's because we as people are always bigger than character. We are always more complex and more interesting than anything you could write on a piece of paper simply because we've lived. And so there are definitely some people who are more transformative and like to do voices and fall in there. And there's, none of this is one on top of the other. But in the end, it has to be you filling that space. And so, whichever kind of actor you are, I think we are all searching for that perfect presence filled with experience. And some people get to that from the outside, and some people get from that from the inside or the bottom or the top or around the back, so we have different ways
And
of
in the
getting
end,
there, but that's it.
because they're
Yeah.
your decisions, you all really actually did that together,
Yeah,
which is pretty
exactly.
cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's D&D.